Good afternoon and welcome to our important session, Welcome the Stranger, Pursuing a Just National Immigration Policy. I am Toni Young. I am just recently retired last night Vice Chair of JCPA, and I'm from Delaware. Thank you. We all know that the JCPA has twin mandates. We want to build strong relationships with community partners, and we want to advocate for effective policies that build a stronger, more pluralistic United States. For us, these two policies go hand in hand. We believe in partnership, we believe in coalitions, we believe in consensus. We believe that what's good for the American Jewish community is good for our country, and what's good for our country is good for the American Jewish community. We, as I know everyone in this room understands well, are interested in both international affairs and domestic affairs. Yesterday we had a full plate talking about Israel and other international issues. Today we've spent the day on many of the most pressing domestic issues. Top on our agenda, of course, we are interested in so many domestic issues, but top on our agenda right now are confronting poverty, protecting human needs programs, reforming our immigration system to reflect a more just, a more effective system that's in keeping with the beliefs and ideals of our country, and of course, addressing the plague of gun violence. We're really proud that we work with all members of Congress in both parties, and we're really proud that we have good connections to the President and the administration. Today, we are really fortunate to have Secretary of Homeland Security Janet Napolitano with us, and we're going to focus on this very important issue of immigration reform. But before that, I would like to introduce a good friend of mine who wanted to be here with us today but was not able to be with us today, a fellow Delawarean. Please turn your attentions to the video screens.
Larry, Rabbi Guto, thank you for giving me this chance to say a few words tonight. I want to start by saying how much I respect your organization, and I also want to thank my good friend who stands for everything you stand for, Toni Young. Thanks, Toni, for suggesting this. You all are associated with everything that's been good and decent, whether it's in foreign policy or domestic policy. And from my perspective, you really do embody the concept of tikkun olam. Your willingness to speak out clearly and loudly to make sure Americans have adequate, affordable health care. You're joining in the fight to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Your help on something near and dear to my heart, the fight to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. Thank you, we reauthorized it. You're just always there, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it and the President appreciates it. Because we share common objectives, not only in domestic policy, but in foreign policy, the mutual, unwavering commitment to the security of Israel, because we know the interests of America and Israel are very much aligned, not just from a moral perspective, but from a security perspective. That's why the President made it absolutely clear we will prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. And we had the deepest security relationship with the State of Israel since I've been involved with Israel, and that's been now 40 years. Your group was founded on the principle that we need to keep the State of Israel secure and to promote it, a just society here at home. You've stuck with both those principles. You've been consistent. You've been consistent with everything you've done since your founding in 1944. And I am proud to have worked with you through my entire career beginning in 1973. It's great to work with an organization that we agree with on almost everything, from gun safety to fixing a broken immigration system. And it's an honor to be proudly associated with you. And, you know, the President and I, we look forward to continuing to work with you. I know you're going to hear from one of the best in the administration, Secretary Napolitano, soon. So, I send my best wishes and treat her well. I'm sure you will. Thank you all for allowing me to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, and we thank you not just for those wonderful words, but for your consistent and continual support of all the issues that are so important to both of us, to all of us. Leviticus teaches us, and excuse me, let me stop myself and say Leviticus first taught us to please make sure your cell phones are off. At this point, we've been told that so many times that I neglected to say it. Okay. Back to Leviticus. Leviticus teaches us that when strangers sojourn with you in the land, you shall not do them wrong. The strangers who sojourn with you shall be to you as the natives among you, and you shall love them as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. This very basic principle informs so much of what we do. It's echoed in the Torah 35 times. Inspired by these teachings, we have always advocated for immigrants' rights, including the ability to escape persecution, the ability to be united with one's family, and to have access to critical public benefits. In this session, we're going to review the current status of the United States immigration system, where we have been, where we are, and where we're going. In order to facilitate the question and answer period, when the Secretary finishes speaking, we're going to hand out cards, or maybe the cards are already on your seat. Please write your questions on the seat as legibly as you can write them, and then we will read them from here in order to make the most efficient use of our time. As I said before, we are enormously pleased today to have Janet Napolitano with us. She was sworn in as the Secretary of Homeland Security on January 21st, 2009. Prior to joining the Obama administration, she was in part of her second term as governor of Arizona. Janet Napolitano served as the first female chair of the National Governors Association. In that position, she was instrumental in creating the Public Safety Task Force and the Homeland Security Advisory Council. She also chaired the Western States Governors Association and served as Attorney General of the state of Arizona and U.S. Attorney to the District Court of Arizona. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Secretary Napolitano.
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you, Toni, for that introduction, and thank you all for being with us today. Thank you to the Vice President for asking you to treat me kindly. And I hope you wrote that down. But I'm delighted to be here. We've tried a couple years to get our schedules to mesh, and so we got them to mesh this year, and it is a particularly good time for us to be meeting because the issues that you are addressing, particularly the immigration issue, are becoming front and center in Washington, D.C. right now. So your timing is good, and what I want to do today is just lay out a few things that we've been doing together, talk about immigration a little bit, and then we'll shut it down and have time for questions. I first have to say that I'm so grateful for your support of the passage of VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act. And I say that because I had personal experience when I was the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. We brought one of the first, if not the first, cases under the VAWA statute. It involved an incident of domestic violence that occurred in a national park, and where federal jurisdiction could attain and where we actually had a crime to prosecute. The VAWA that was just reauthorized is very complete, it's cohesive, it's good, and it is such an important tool for us to have in, sadly to say, but the never-ending issue of violence in the home. So thank you for your support of VAWA. And thank you for your support and your interactions with us, with President Obama's administration, but more particularly with the Department of Homeland Security, DHS. We are very strongly committed to the safety and security of the Jewish community in the United States. And we've made special and extensive efforts to make sure that we're doing all we can together to make sure that schools are safe and synagogues are safe and community centers are safe in a world where sometimes one feels like there are so many issues out there and so many targets. So let me, if I might, just say that with respect to JCPA and the Jewish community writ large, we have worked together to prepare and hopefully prevent a number of threats from manifesting themselves, whether they originate here with a homegrown violent extremist or abroad with a terrorist or someone related to the Al-Qaeda ideology. So what does this mean? Well, what it means is that we come together and we focus on things like exchanging information. We focus on things like site assessments. We focus on things like tabletop exercises. We make sure that we get out as much information as we can, as quickly as we can, particularly when there has been an event. I'm going to speak with some specifics about that, but I'm going to stop now. I'm now going to sequester my talk. And say that everything I have written here is affected by sequester. The way sequester was passed, written and passed, is it requires a great big, slice off every account of the budget, and there's no flexibility in it. Things that we do at DHS, we patrol the borders, we run the airports in terms of the ports of entry, we guard the maritime environment of the United States. We do intel and analysis and work with state and local tribal law enforcement and with faith-based communities on safety and security. All of these things are affected by sequester. We are going to persevere and do all we can and focus on our fundamental mission, safety and security. That comes first. But I must say, as the Secretary, and reiterate the testimony I gave before the Senate a couple of weeks ago, there has got to be a better way to run a railroad than this. I've been doing public service and government for 20-some-odd years, and I've never seen anything like this. So we have those challenges. We have challenges. We have to meet them. We have to figure out ways to work within the resources that we have, and we will, and that's going to put a premium on partnership, on leveraging resources together. So I'm going to now unsequester myself and talk about some of the things that we are doing. For example, we have worked with you and with other Jewish institutions to make sure that you have information. What does that mean? It means that we have something called the SCAN network, the Secure Community Network, which facilitates the exchange of threat information and what can be done to mitigate that throughout the country. We've expanded something called the If You See Something, Say Something campaign. It is, and you have no doubt seen materials about that in synagogues and Jewish schools and so forth around the country, because you've been great partners on If You See Something, Say Something. We've been hosting regular conference calls. The conference call kind of miniaturizes it, because you'll have 1,800 people on a conference call. But the goal is to get information out quickly. So, when there's a bus bombing in Bulgaria, by way of example, and we are getting information out to you right away as to, do we have any specific or credible information as to anything planned in the United States? What are we doing? When we had a case of someone who was recruited by the Quds Force in Iran to cross the border from Mexico into the United States to target the ambassador from Saudi Arabia. Well, what does that mean? And how do we make sure that we are keeping everybody in the loop and informed, and that we are working together? So one of the things Sequester does, and one of the things we have been doing, is really leveraging our resources together. And we're going to have to do that more and more. We are doing a number of things, if I might say, with the country of Israel. This is a partnership that goes way back. It predates my secretaryship. But when we talk about Israel, we talk about research and development that we're doing together. We talk about a joint agreement between our scientists and researchers who are working on cutting-edge security technology and their counterparts in Israel. And those agreements and those people are working all the time, leveraging, as I say, sharing, doing, you know how scientists are. They think out of the box. The really good ones do anyway. And that's what we want, kind of thinking out the box about how does our joint security look like moving forward. And we have partnerships that affect travel. Global Entry, for example, is the name of a program. If you're traveling internationally, you should become a member of Global Entry. You get on the Customs and Border Protection website, go on globalentry.gov. You sign up, you'll get an interview, you'll give us your biometrics and a check for $100 or $120, I forget the fee, that's something like that. And it allows you at 35 of our large international airports to really cut through the lines and come right on through because we will already have information about you, and we will already know what we need to know about you from a safety of travel perspective. So if and when you land at JFK, any of you done that recently? You know, they can have long lines there. And I know, I spent a day in a line at JFK once. Here's the point is if we can separate out those that we know about and speed them through the lines themselves will become shorter. And since we're dealing in a world where we have lots of older airports not really built for the kind of security we need today, we've had to get creative and think outside the box about what a good answer is. So Global Entry is an agreement we have with Israel now in terms of travel back from Israel, and it's the only country right now that we are actually doing it both ways, or getting ready to do it both ways. We're still in the pilot testing kind of thing. So get your Global Entry card and then get a TSA pre-check card. Anybody here have a pre-check card? Do you like it? Is it the greatest? Good. I like that answer. Okay. So same theory. It's growing. It's not just random. It will, in the end, be uniform across the country, but we really have to go airline by airline because they're the ones that insert the data on the boarding pass. So, but it's coming soon to a motion picture theater near you. And we hope by the end of this year that 1 in 4 travelers will be in one of these programs. And then we'll really start seeing some effect on the length of the lines, assuming sequestration is over. I mention it only because I want to illustrate the kind of very dynamic partnership that we have with Israel and continue to have in a number of areas. But let me go to the area that I want to speak most about with you today, and that is the area of immigration reform. Just by way of background about me, I grew up in New Mexico. And after college in California and law school back in the East, I wanted to move back to the Southwest, and I moved to Phoenix, Arizona. didn't know anybody when I moved there. That's another story. And it was really hot. But I stayed. I love Arizona. I love living in the West. The point being that I've spent almost my whole life in one of our border states. And I can tell you now that the border, by way of resources and manpower and technology and fences and aerial coverage, has more assets and is more secure than it's been in decades. And we see that reflected in the numbers, where illegal immigration attempts are down to 40-year lows. The technology we have is a huge force multiplier. Even without it, we have a record number of boots on the ground, agents on the ground between the ports. And for the first time, we have aerial coverage across the whole southwest border. I know the border very well. And I also know the immigration story very well, as do, I think, most everyone here. Our families have immigration histories. They may go back a couple of generations, they may go back many generations, but we are, unless somebody's here from the Navajo Nation or as a Hopi or a Cherokee or so forth, unless you're one of the Native Americans, we are a nation of immigrants to this continent, to this country. And that has made us a strong and vibrant country with a robust and diverse culture. And that makes our country the place where everybody wants to come. Because you literally can come here with nothing and with a lot, with something. And you can thrive and your family can thrive and you can do it in a country that is free and open and has wonderful values. So we all have the immigration story in our backgrounds. And mine is my grandparents from Italy. That probably surprises you. And then there's the fact that the border now has a record amount of security there. So we can take those things and say, okay, we know all of this. Why do we need immigration reform? We need it because the system does not work the way it was intended to. It just doesn't. And so we need to be looking not just at the border, and some people want to say, we can't do immigration until the border is secure. I've just talked a little bit about that, but my experience has been that the definition of border security is highly elusive. And if it's a goalpost, it's a goalpost that keeps moving. And moving and moving. And it is too often used, I'm afraid, as a reason not to address the overriding issue, which is the whole system of immigration, of which border security is an important part, right? We know the system isn't working. We know the common sense things that need to be done. We need to raise the number of visas that our country allows so more people can come here. We know who they are. We have their biometrics. Why is that important? A, it's important because our country demographically needs people and will need people as this century moves along. And also from a security standpoint, which is the way I look at things, I want to know who's coming, who's coming in. I want their biometrics, I want some idea of where they're going and what they're planning on doing. One of the things that happens when you have a broken immigration system is you create false incentives to cross illegally. If you can't get a visa to visit the United States for 8 years or 9 years, you've got an incentive. If you're married and you can't get reunited with your family for 10 years, well, you have an incentive. So we like the visa system, those who can come legally, reformed and opened up so that between the ports of entry we can focus on the narco traffickers and the human traffickers and those who seek to do us harm using that border as a mechanism with which to do so. So the border security first argument really needs to be countered with, in my judgment, with border security as a part of a system. What are the other parts? As I mentioned, we need to make it better easier, more streamlined for people to come legally. We need a nationwide employment verification system. Why do we need this? Because the primary driver of illegal immigration is work. It's work. We have this vibrant economy. It is the land of opportunity. We represent ourselves like that to the world, and the world listens to that, and they see that, and they want to come. So we need to make sure that that is not distorted by certain employers trying to undercut the labor market and pay low wages, no benefits, of course, no anything. Exploitation of workers is a problem. We need to fix that. We need to deal with the demand for illegal labor as we also deal with the supply. Finally, we need to be realistic about those who are already here illegally, right? I mean, here's the thing. You're supposed to deport. This is what they tell me sometimes as I'm the secretary. Why am I not deporting 11 million people? And you know, first of all, it's kind of hard. In fact, they give us, everything in a way. You pencil it out, and we have been actually deporting, removing from the country more people than ever before, much to the chagrin of some of our friends. We've changed the composition of who we remove to focus on those who have criminal records or have been repeat violators, using the border as a revolving door. We make those the overwhelming majority of our removals. We don't try to look at everyone the same. We don't try to look at a young person going to college who was basically raised here the same as a drug smuggler. We think you can make priorities, draw logical distinctions, and do that, and we have. But in the end, you have neither the facility, the resources, nor, quite frankly, any kind of realistic ability to deal with those here in the country illegally. So let's talk about what we should do. What we should do, and the President has spoken to this, what we should do is give these people the opportunity to earn their way back and to get right with the law, right? That's what we should do. And when we do that, there's all kinds of benefits, one of which is in communities where there are a lot of immigrants, many of whom are in the country illegally, there is a reticence to deal with law enforcement. And so there's a reticence to be to testify as a witness in a crime. There's a reticence to come forward if there were a crime. If you are the victim of domestic violence in your home, but you're in the country illegally, you don't want to go to law enforcement because you don't run the risk that you will be removed from the country. So that is why we need to be thinking about how you earn your way back, what kind of penalty you pay, what's fair, what's just, but what gets you right with the law. So in the end, an overall system package has to encompass, solid border security that is sustained over time. We don't just leave it once we think we've done enough. It means opening up the legal immigration system, particularly in areas where we know we have a shortage of qualified workers. It means a national employer verification program, so we cut back on that demand. And finally, it means dealing realistically, firmly and fairly with those in the country illegally so they get right with the law. Now, that's a systemic approach, and that's what it requires now. That's where we're at. Because it's unreasonable for us just to keep trundling along the way we are. and have immigration be such a football being tossed back and forth. These are real people's lives we're talking about. These are families that can get divided under an immigration system. These are young people whose futures we have in our collective hands. We can do this. We can do this. We must do this. And we must do it in a way that is engaged, that embarks upon civil debate and discussion, because some of these are hard concepts for people, and we must be as nonpartisan as possible. Notice I didn't say bipartisan. I said nonpartisan. Let's solve a problem. Let's fix something. So we remain hopeful and are hopeful that the process started in the Senate will bear fruit sometime soon. There are signs out of the House that they too may have a bill, and we'll see that as well. And then let's move them in a way that takes into account our American values and our American history. And that's what I will tell you as we move through this next period of sequestration and budgets and all the rest, all very important. But I think where I need to put my mind and my heart is going to be immigration. All right, thank you.
I think my mic is on. Can you all hear me? Yes.
I see some.
Thank you.
I see some cards coming too.
Good. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk, and it makes us feel very comfortable with this systemic change. While I'm waiting for the questions, let me use your time wisely and ask you one question.
Sure.
I love the way you sequestered your speech, but how will sequestration affect immigration reform right now? Will it slow it down?
I hope not. I mean, it does affect what we're doing in the law enforcement realm. You know, we use to manage the border well, and I'm talking about the southwest border. If any of you all want to talk about the northern border, I can do that as well. But these discussions tend to drift to the southwest. We had to last Thursday send out furlough notices to 60,000 Customs and Border Protection officers and agents. The furlough that we have to do under the current form of sequestration that we are existing under equates, just for the Border Patrol, not Customs, but the Border Patrol, to about 5,000 Border Patrol agents in terms of hours. And we're having to make adjustments throughout everything that we do. You know, so we'll see. A lot of these haven't taken full effect yet. They will accelerate over time. Where you will probably see some of this in terms of your own lives is in lines. Lines, if you're coming into the country and have to clear customs, unless you have your global entry card, are going to get longer as this is the low travel season of the year. When we hit spring break and then summer break, the high travel seasons, if there's not a solution figured out to sequester as it's currently written, I just tell my friends, just plan on spending some time and, make sure you've got lots of things to entertain the kids with, because the lines are going to be very, very long. At the border itself, we're going to do everything we can to sustain our efforts there. We can only stretch our people so far because we will have no ability to pay overtime. So it's a real concern. So for us, safety and security come first. We're going to do everything we can. The sequester that we are currently under, however, will have a deleterious impact over time.
Thank you. And now we have some questions from all of you. The first question that I'm going to read are, what are the main barriers you see to keep immigration reform from proceeding?
I think it's a tough issue for some people, and it's a tough issue politically. And so that's why I keep saying it should be nonpartisan. It's like, look, let's solve a problem. Let's demonstrate to the world we can do this, and that we, the most diverse nation in the world, can actually have an immigration system that looks not to the past but to the future and what our country needs for the future. Getting something through the Senate and the House, as you can tell from the fact that we're in a sequester, is difficult. I will say, however, having been and having seen this issue in the first term, there is a lot more movement and excellent work really being done now than I saw in the first 4 years. I think there's a real legitimacy to this effort and real timeliness to the fact that you're in D.C. right now.
Thank you. I will make one overall apology if I butcher anybody's question, but as I say, this is in the effort to get as many questions in as possible. Immigration reform is important, but so is security. In fact, the partnership between DHS and the Jewish community in security has been great. From the See Something, Say Something campaign to the nonprofit security, great program. So how do you make sure that immigration reform takes into account security concerns?
Oh, it has to. That's one of the reasons I want reform. You know, the worst thing in a way from a security standpoint is having 11 million people in the country who you don't know who they are. You know, let's have a way to bring them out of the shadows so we know who they are. So we can have biometrics, so that we can check criminal histories and that they've paid taxes and all the rest. That's much better for us. And to the extent we don't have to use our resources on someone like that, we can focus our resources on terrorists, terrorist groups that seek to get operatives into the country over the border. We can focus on transnational criminal organizations and others who are real wrongdoers and seek to do us real harm. So from a system point of view and from a security standpoint, immigration makes all the sense in the world.
Thank you. They're coming fast and furious. While the President has deferred immigration action against young adults brought here as children, many eligible young people in our community are either afraid to register or understand about the consequences of multi-year process. Is anything being done to improve or clarify the process?
Oh, I think we call it Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, and it is really an exercise of prosecutorial discretion. You remember when I said, look, we're going to prioritize those with criminal records and so forth? Well, the flip side of that is we're going to not prioritize those who are low risk and that we feel pretty comfortable about. And the first group in that category are the young people brought here when they were children who've grown up here. Most of them have never been to their country of origin. I don't speak the language and so forth. So dealing with them first made all the sense in the world. So it was done through, and very carefully done, as an exercise of prosecutorial discretion. But when it actually was announced and then got up and running, and it got up and running in 60 days, which is amazing for government, but really amazing for and a program of this size and scope. But if you go on the website, it walks you through everything. You can even get the forms on the website. There's places where it tells you things to watch out for, like remember to sign your forms. You got to sign your form and all the rest. We have extensive outreach throughout the country. I think some of you may be involved actually in reaching out to young people and helping them either assemble what they need to complete an application or helping them with the fee that's associated with that, because there's no appropriation for this, so it's got to stand on its own language through the fee charged. We now have had, these are rough numbers, but I would say since we got up and running, we've had about 400,000 applications, and 200,000 have already been granted. I mean, they've been through the whole process. You know, we have their biometrics, we've run all the checks, we've done everything we can. They were able to establish their places where they've lived, and they now have DACA. So really the best advertisement for DACA at this point is going to be the young people themselves who have it.
Word of mouth.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. What criteria should be enacted to determine when the Mexican border is truly secure? What time frame do you estimate this would take?
Well, again, that's the unanswerable question. What do you mean by totally secure? Do you mean, okay, does it mean no one ever crosses the Mexican border illegally? Ever? Is that what you mean by totally secure? You know, that's when I say it's moving the goalpost. Look, in my view, security means that you have the manpower, the aerial assets, the technology necessary to have real-time surveillance over the highly trafficked areas of the border and the ability to interdict any traffic you see coming through there that may be illegal. We don't need the same resources in all areas of the border. Why? Because they're impossible to get through. So you don't have the same kind of numbers you have on some of the other places. But it's really looking at the highly trafficked areas and what you need to do to make sure you have a high probability of interdiction.
Okay. What can be done about errors out of date databases used for E-Verify? Current reports are 10% errors.
The report is in error.
The report is in error.
Because I watch this like a hawk, and I'll tell you that E-Verify has been around for a while. Yeah, when it started, it had a pretty serious error rate, and that has been rectified so that the current error rate, I think, is I want to say 1.3% at most, and those errors, when are resolved within 3 to 5 days, you don't have the ability to fire somebody during that period while the error is being corrected. You can actually go on the E-Verify website, E-Verify self-check, and self-check yourself to make sure your name is associated with the right social security number. That's the most common error. And it happens most commonly, for example, when someone gets married and changes their last name, but their social security record is in their original name. So you know, once you do that, it's fine. And that's the largest kind of error we get. And so I'll put the E-Verify record up. I think it actually is not only viable, but a good and very easy to use system for people.
Good, thank you. And we have one final question here, which is, how will sequester affect domestic travel?
Well, a couple of ways, I think. In TSA, we don't need to furlough anyone. We cannot pay overtime, however, and we cannot hire to fill attrited vacancies. And the FAA, which is part of the Department of Transportation, has its own limitations. So, you know, things we do to kind of mitigate a high travel season and how we keep lots of lanes open during the summer, those are things we will not be able to do under sequester as it's currently drafted, as it's currently in force. And that means, I fear, that you will see lines at customs, unless you have your global entry, and longer lines domestically for many routes, unless you have your TSA pre-check.
Thank you very much, but I'm going to turn the mic momentarily.
Privilege of the chair, one last question for you. Would you care to comment on how federal immigration reform, if it is enacted, will affect the state very restrictive immigration laws that are now in place, including your state?
Arizona. I think I think one of the things that a federal law can address are some of the issues raised by the states. And I think one of the things that Congress will need to look at is the scope of preemption. The preemption is the doctrine that says, how the federal law controls under certain circumstances. There's been a lot of litigation on this. A lot of lawyers have made their fame and fortune arguing about preemption in this arena. But the fact is, and this was really confirmed by the Supreme Court's opinion last year, looking at an Arizona law called 1070, Senate Bill 1070, the primacy of the federal government where immigration and borders are concerned is fundamental to the nation and in the Constitution. This is not an area where a sharing of power was intended by our forefathers. So we have prime responsibility here and prime jurisdiction here. There may be some things we want to do in cooperation or coordination with the states, and we do that in many different ways. But when it comes down to at root, at its base, where does the authority and jurisdiction governing immigration lie? It lies within the United States, and it lies within the executive branch and the legislative branch.
I think that's a wonderful place.
Thank you.